At this moment, a heavy downpour also began to fall. Not only was Grid surprised that the other person was still alive. Even Maxong was stunned by the scene before him for a few seconds. The unpleasant sound of the sword dragging on the ground and a cold voice rang out. Although I have no feelings for humans, you are so bad at calculating that you are willing to trade your life just to save that brat. Iorugd held in his hand a sword with a crimson sheen like the color of fresh blood. He turned his evil eyes straight at Grid and said, "Isn't that a very stupid decision, but because of that I will help you." Iorugd's initiative to stand up and express his willingness to help really made Grid extremely surprised and thought, Iorugd, didn't he betray me? Another idiot stood up and confronted him, Maxong said in frustration. I've been annoyed for a while now, that devil is nothing but a bag of bones. Iorugd still calmly replied, if you want revenge on humans then try defeating me. He gripped the hilt of his sword tightly in his hand and said, I will make you wake up. Iorugd then used the Hell Moon sword technique. It was still his first time facing Iorugd, so Maxong did not anticipate his moves and was completely hit by this fatal slash, with just this one attack from Iorugd. Maxong had suffered 10,240,600 damage. Grid stood by the side watching in horror. He frowned and thought to himself, millions of damage from just one slash, his swordsmanship was too terrifying. The remaining health was gone with just one slash that cut through the entire space. Grid sneered and said, how absurd, just because of that guy's stubbornness, I can't use the sword now. I'm not willing to accept it. Seeing that the situation before his eyes had begun to take a positive turn, Lul turned back and said to his friend, Euphemina, it's almost over, let's attack. It was also thanks to the support of the two people that Maxong was held firmly in one place, waiting for this right opportunity. Grid combined failure and idea longsword, then used Pagma's sword technique as well. In this moment, Maxong also knew that he was in danger of being finished, but he only had one thought. It was a message to his lost daughter, Ohong, if I could go back to that day, I would not let you go, even if I had to tear myself into pieces. Even though he was screaming in pain. But in his mind there was only one thought, at that time I wanted to save you by all means, my beloved daughter. It seemed that when he thought about his lost daughter, the hatred in Maxong's heart surged even more strongly. He resentfully thought to himself, I will kill and sacrifice these beasts of the outside world, so that my daughter can go to the sea god more comfortably, even if just a little. Thinking of this, his eyes gradually blurred with tears. He shouted, you bastards don't even think about touching my clansmen. Maxong wanted to attack Grid but failed. To end things as quickly as possible, Grid used the killing move. Maxong was hit and screamed in extreme pain. Countless loud explosions also followed, causing the architecture of this place to be almost completely destroyed. Then hidden under the thick layers of white smoke were the stone pillars and stone foundations that had exploded and lost their original shape. In that smoky scene, Grid's breathing became heavy due to exhaustion. He panted as he said, that evil guy. Seeing that Maxong still had the strength to support himself with his hands on the ground, Grid coldly laughed and said, be ashamed. Maxong, whose body had less than 10% health left, glared at him, who laughed and continued. Instead of hiding for years with that power, you should have used it a long time ago. Grid smiled and asked, but what do you think? He stood opposite him and jokingly said, does it feel better after shouting? That's what being healthy is like. At the same time the system notification rang in his ear. You have met the requirements to complete the mission, you have won the battle with the Water King Maxong. Maxong frowned at Grid and hesitantly asked, who are you? But Grid did not reply, but instead squinted his eyes and grinned. I have treated you a lot, remember to pay for the medicine. Finally, the hidden link quest of the Water King's Wrath was completed. It could be seen that this quest was quite difficult, but for Grid, it was the most interesting quest. Inside the palace hall with its gloomy and desolate atmosphere, suddenly a loud cheer filled with joy rang out saying, the last one, we have cleared the entire palace hall. Tobin raised his hand to rub his aching neck and said with some regret, I thought it was just a light beating. I didn't expect to use up the entire bottle of medicine. Vander sitting next to him also let out a breath and said, it's a miracle that we were able to stop so many enemies, even though we didn't have any soldiers to support us. Hearing that, Faker just snorted coldly and said frankly, there is no such thing as a miracle. He silently glanced at Piero and Asmafel who were standing and laughing on the opposite side, silent for a few seconds before continuing. Because that day Piero and Asmafel had together destroyed at least 500 enemies, I never thought you were this strong. I was really shocked. In another corner, Ibelin was pointing at the pile of loot on the ground and laughing excitedly. Those who came from the Silver Knights developed very slowly, I can sell these items to them at a cheap price. Toon standing at the side also smiled and said, there are many expensive loots, just like those who farm PvP. I guess I can learn a lot of new crafting methods too, unlike those two. Jasuka said somewhat sadly, but because the invasion happened earlier than expected, too many people from the water tribe died. Pon sat not far away and clicked his tongue softly, then said calmly, it's just that NPCs die. There's nothing to be sorry about, they'll just be reborn later, it's nothing. Jasuka didn't bother to say much to him, she replied in frustration. If he spent time with NPCs like Grid, he would have noticed. She also kindly explained to him that time is limited just like us in the outside world. It is said that NPCs in Satisfy cannot come back if they die. While Jasuka was still talking, suddenly the prince of the water tribe, Galong, appeared. He carried gratitude and sincerely smiled and said, thank you. The water tribe owed you too much, instead of comfortably accepting this gratitude. Jasuka took the blame on himself, saying, Prince Galong, please send my condolences for the great losses. We should have come sooner. Galong shook his head slightly and smiled, the sea god was very impressed with your fighting spirit. It's fine to stop here, I will inform His Majesty about your achievements. Let's go to the palace together, go and have an audience. At the same time, in the main palace of the water tribe. Standing in front of the water tribe King Maxong were 5 people, from left to right, Iarugd, Grid, Lul, Jude, and finally Euphemina, and next to Maxong was his biological son named Paeon. The system's mechanical voice sent a notification, the hidden link mission of the Water King's Wrath has been completed. The information about the Knight Jude has been updated, the information about the Demon Sword Iarugd has also been updated. First is Jude's information, besides the already known name, his current age is 30. Gender is male, race is human, and occupation is Grid's Knight. Currently at level 303, his body will surpass its limits when going through a battle with a strong person. In terms of strength, stamina and agility will increase to the maximum. Currently 1 out of 20, must win a few more matches against other opponents, then he will be supplemented with more strength. In terms of skills, there is advanced swordsmanship proficiency, A rank, weapon snatching S rank, silence A rank, I don't know anything, number level. So a thought flashed through Grid's mind, his intelligence was still lacking but his growth rate was very high. If he often brought Jude along, he might become a famous NPC, he thought and then opened his palm. The image of a shirt immediately appeared on it, then he smiled and said, Jude, you tried your best, at least wear this. Next up is the second character to be promoted, Iarugd. Age unknown, gender male, race horned demon. Titled the best swordsman in hell, when equipped with a sword weapon. Attack power will be doubled, attack weak points with a 100% chance, activate critical attacks, and dodge rate increases by 50%. As for skills, there are skills like S-rank Swordsman Eyes, S-rank Solitary Life, S-rank Mad Sword, S-rank Fire Sword, S-rank Hell Sword, and S-rank Transcendent Sword, by winning a battle against a strong opponent. He can regain some of his consciousness, repeating that a few times will be able to recover all of his skills. Current score is 1 out of 10, must win some more battles to restore his power. Although he was born a horned demon classified as a low-class demon, through constant sword training he became the strongest swordsman in hell. However, he was unable to overcome his innate limitations and was defeated in a battle with the great demon Zepa. After that, his soul was cursed and placed in the magic sword, listening to his own story again. Iarugd thought to himself with some boredom, he could only appear like this once a day. And it was only for 10 minutes, it was really boring. Grid now knew how Iarugd was born and he could completely understand why he was so excited. He turned back to look at Iarugd and smiled, next time you go out, get some fresh air Iarugd, I'm sure I'll get chopped too. After Grid said this, Iarugd heard the mechanical voice of the system ringing in his ear saying, you have a vague good feeling towards your close friend and then cut Grid. He muttered, the sword is an object born to cut. Then Iarugd raised his head and turned his gaze towards Grid. He was standing there looking at the sword stuck in the ground and thinking, if you're worried, then cut off your own wrist. Grid just stood there and looked at the sword for a long time before speaking, well, then. He turned to look at Maxong who was sitting still in one place and said with a smile, now let's discuss the post-war handling process, King Maxong. Paeon was standing by and waiting for his father's response, when suddenly a familiar voice rang out. Your Majesty, we have gathered the benefactors of the water tribe. Paeon quickly turned his head and found that it was a group of people full of familiar faces such as Piero, Faker, Galong and Jasuka, all 4 of them had the same expression of surprise. And Galong, who was standing in the middle, was still in the middle of saying something like, please praise their achievements and the king's dignity. Seeing his teammates had arrived, Grid couldn't hide his joy and excitement as he waved his hand. He smiled and said, oh Jasuka, are you done outside? I was just about to go help. On the opposite side of him, Maxong was still maintaining silence and kneeling on the ground, but instead of smiling friendly and greeting back, all 4 of them had changed to an attitude of extreme horror, especially Galong. As a prince of the water tribe, how could he accept that his high and mighty father had become so disgraced? He opened his eyes wide and said loudly, "Father, what the hell are you doing?" Jasuka standing right next to him also asked extremely curiously, "Why does the king have to kneel like that? What happened?" Not giving Grid a chance to reply, Galong turned around, spitting and angrily saying, "Shut up. You guys have been acting disgustingly helpful right in front of me, but in the end you tried to target His Majesty. It is right that I do not believe in the morality of you beasts." Paeyong didn't know when he appeared right next to him, calmly raised his hand and hit his stomach and said, "Stop it, Galong, it's not like what you think, even his brother is like that." Galong could only say 2 words, "Brother." Paeyong didn't bother to explain much to him, but simply said, "Look into your father's eyes." Galong did not question it anymore and just listened. Indeed, when he looked into his father's eyes, he also realized the obvious difference. Paeyong saw this and continued speaking softly. Since Ohon left, father had never seen anything so clearly and clearly. It seemed that he had finally found a place to vent his anger. Maxon, after bowing his head for a long time, raised his head and asked Grid 3 words, "Why?" Grid didn't understand and exclaimed. Maxon let out a soft sigh and continued, "Didn't he just risk his life for his subordinates? Can that choice be exchanged for the greed that is aiming for the throne?" Grid's pupils constricted slightly. He simply replied, "It was all because of debt." He turned his head to look at Jude and smiled, "It's been a long time since I saved humans. This guy is my first knight and has sworn that he will protect me at all costs. Besides, I was in such a hurry just now that my body moved on its own accord." Grid spoke honestly while thinking of his close comrades. "They were the first to acknowledge me, but they scolded me without hesitation when I started to go astray. I accepted the challenge until I realized for myself that these were the friends who guided me by believing in me and standing by me." Images of him and them fighting together also appeared in his mind. Grid smiled and continued, "I owe everyone here. That's why I'm protecting them. The reason I became a guildmaster was also to repay what I received from them." He looked down at Maxon, his voice sharp. "To me, leadership is a place to repay debts. Do you really not owe those who believed in and followed you?" Grid thought of his son, his voice also became hoarse as he spoke. His anger must have been so heavy that even someone like me who had a child could not imagine. He paused here, let out a breath, and continued. But just sitting there on that single chair and not even bothering to look at the people was a completely different matter. Maxon's pupils began to relax as he listened to the sentence. "If you feel sad and want to stop, then come down here and leave everything to me to handle." Grid smiled and advised him, "Now pay your debt. Just like I did, my high court will let you know who helped you survive until now." Paeyong, who was standing a distance away, also quickly knelt down on the ground, his voice also urgent as he said, "Father, I would also like to take the liberty of saying this, I will definitely try my best to protect and monitor the door that is opening to the outside world." The space was so quiet that only Paeyong's voice could be heard, asking people to hold back their grief and look to the future ahead. After a few minutes of silence, Maxon finally reacted. He slowly propped himself up on the ground and said hoarsely, "You said your name is Grid, right? I heard from you Femina that you are the Lord of Ridan." Suddenly, water bubbles and streams of green light appeared and enveloped the group of people. Maxon's hoarse voice continued to resound, saying that it was inappropriate to discuss debts with someone who had been burdened with power since birth. One could not borrow something from others, even from the greedy world outside. He let out a small sigh and continued. "The people cannot give up their lives for the sake of the royal family, but if we cannot resolve Ohon's hatred, we cannot move forward." Seeing Grid's surprised expression as his wound was healing, Maxon said, "There are things that need to be kept but must be changed. There are things that need to be changed but must be kept. It is not easy for a water tribe that has been at the bottom of the sea for hundreds of years." He narrowed his eyes and said, "If one can do it, then one is suited for the job. Only those who can rule over natural enemies like monsters and demons with human strength and prioritize the lives of their subordinates even if they are just nameless figures." Maxon gently flew up and said, "If you need to help someone, please hold my hand." He spread his arms out to the sides, relaxed his body and flew up, speaking. Guiding the water tribe forward, Maxon's body gradually became transparent. He was like a large fish with a graceful body that gently flew around Grid. He spoke as he flew. "Until that queen is punished and you can help us stabilize the kingdom, the water tribe will definitely follow what you said." Before the faces of these 4 people, Euphemina, Piero, Lal, and Jasuka, with expressions of both surprise and joy. This was truly a wonderful sight. Where the king of a race declared his allegiance to Grid, that is, to Grid, and that was another transformation, signaling the beginning of a smooth road ahead. Lowell broke out in a cold sweat. He couldn't help but feel absolute respect and admiration for Grid. He was thinking to himself that a deep-sea kingdom with abundant resources would be of great benefit to the Lord if he could manage this place well. He didn't expect that he would be able to resolve a situation like this. It was true that the entire world had now become one with Grid's will. Grid smiled comfortably and said, "Leave it to me, from now on I will show you a different world." And so, after the fire subsided, an alliance treaty between the Fine Goods Guild and the Water Tribe was signed under Lowell's leadership. The alliance treaty between the two sides clearly and specifically stated that the two sides must interact with each other in all fields including military, economic, religious, and must support Siren with 100,000 gold per month for 2 years. And at the same time, they must also receive 20% of the profits generated by Siren in the future. In case of emergency, the high-class items guild will have the right to temporarily deploy defense forces in the Water Tribe and command the entire Water Tribe. When Grid ascends the throne, the Water Tribe will be annexed into the high-class items guild's territory. Even the 7 major guilds only had one territory, and in a situation where there were millions of guilds that didn't even have a territory, it could be considered a prelude to a grand project, with a scale that could extend beyond 3 territories and involve an entire nation. Although there is no such thing as a job that doesn't start with difficulty, it is an honest choice that leads to the best outcome for both parties. Whether this will be successful or not depends entirely on Grid's ability. Then, when news of the treaty was heard, the laughter of the 300 guild members echoed everywhere, and it became a fear for some people. In a large cave located deep in a high mountain, a voice filled with curiosity rang out. Most of the members quit their activities because they were afraid of this guild. But what was the reason? Inside the cave, a rather tense exchange was taking place. The two sisters with opposite hair colors, black and white, seemed to be very upset. The black-haired girl said, "It was that crazy bastard's fault for barging in. If we had gathered together, the result would have been different." The white-haired girl also agreed, saying, "That's right. I can pay any amount. Gather more supporters to avenge Ridan, Master." The person called Master was sitting on the chair opposite the throne. He was wearing a long, wide black cloak. He was completely covered from head to toe, so his face and body could not be seen. This allowed him to conceal his identity. In contrast to the somewhat agitated attitude of the two sisters, he was still very calm and replied gently, "We are only pursuing our own interests. There is no cooperation here. And because you forgot the rule, absolutely do not accept deals with low success rates. Therefore, we failed this mission. This makes me feel very angry." He opened his eyes slightly and looked at the two sisters and said, "Stop being so dramatic. Everything has an end. And so does the growth of the elite club. The glorious halo of the legendary farmer will also end soon." He smiled wickedly and said meaningfully, "And a tree that has stopped growing will disappear as soon as it is cut down." He thought arrogantly in his mind. They are just dry wood to contribute to the master's achievements. Hearing these words, the two sisters did not rush to calculate anymore. The black-haired younger sister turned to her older sister and asked, But sister, what about your pants?" The white-haired older sister had a muscular body but wore a short pleated skirt, which made her look quite strange. Because she was so embarrassed that she became angry, she just shouted the 2 words "shut up" and did not say anything else. At the same time, in another place. In a large house with a shell-shaped design, Piero's respectful voice rang out. "Please take this, my lord." Another voice heard this and exclaimed, "You picked up that item, Piero?" "A pair of pants." Looking at the image of the pants displayed on the system panel, Piero explained that this was a trophy obtained after defeating the white-haired woman. The other person asked in surprise, "Was it an item from the White Demon?" At this moment, Grid was also looking at the pants intently and thinking to himself, "This is indeed a strange item. What kind of item must a human have to be able to confront the strongest players?" Piero also had to work quite hard to be able to deal with the White Demon. It was not simple at all. Grid thought, "Okay, let's see." Then he opened his mouth and said 2 words, "appraisal," and immediately the system analyzed the image and data information and announced that it could not fully grasp the features. This is a cruiser's pants, legendary class. The durability is infinite, the defense is 430. The pants can help the wearer reduce damage by 40%, and also receive benefits such as agility increased by 10%, evasion ability also increased by 30%, all skills using the lower body increased by 20%. The effect of the set is unknown. This is the masterpiece created by the legendary tailor, boasting infinite elasticity and absolutely no tearing. Grid couldn't hide his surprise when he heard that. He widened his eyes and thought to himself, unlimited options. Reduces the damage caused by normal slashes or stabs by 40%, and they're not fixed values but percentage options. The image of Khan gradually appeared in Grid's mind. He continued to think that, if it was a stealth equipment, the cruiser's invisibility cloak was the most famous, the legendary tailor who had existed 200 years ago. He was the invisibility cloak maker who suggested the zippered hood. Grid thought to himself as he touched the system screen. An infinitely durable material that cannot be appraised, and the creator's name is attached to the item. This must be a product made of fabric created by him. I never thought I would encounter such a legendary work in a place like this. Thinking of this, Grid raised a finger and gently drew the image of the pants, his expression somewhat sad and disappointed. He muttered, although it looked quite interesting, its defensive ability was not enough to meet his fighting style. If my fighting skills were similar to Kraugel's, I would have used it immediately. Grid raised his head and looked at the three people standing on the high platform, laughing and talking happily. Those three people were Regis, Faker, and Jasuka. He secretly calculated in his heart that agility and evasion were the important stats for Jasuka, Faker, and Regis. Instead of causing trouble by creating unnecessary competition, it would be better to proactively hand it over to one person. Looking at Regis's handsome face that was smiling so brightly and captivatingly, Grid thought to himself, Regis' ultimate move used his fighting spirit, which was ineffective as a resource. Fighting spirit was related to the damage of both sides. Therefore, if the defense was high, the ultimate's rotation rate would be reduced too much. Next, he looked away from Faker and thought, this item seems to be suitable for someone whose only lower body skill is diving and kicking like Jasuka. The most suitable person is someone with a weak body and needs to focus on the agility of the lower body to be able to dodge and attack. Seeing Grid was lost in his own thoughts, Piero hesitated a bit before speaking, and now that everything was settled, I have a request, my lord. Even though he had just woken up from his thoughts, Grid still quickly asked. Huh, what is it? Piero placed a hand on his chest, slightly bent down, closed his eyes and said respectfully, in addition to helping with the reconstruction. I want to try farming here, please allow me to stay in the water tribe for a while. Grid was stunned, and even Lowell, who was standing next to him, couldn't help but speak out in confusion. What? There's nothing around here but sand and seawater. There's no way to grow crops. But Piero was still very calm, clasping his hands behind his back and speaking slowly. If the agricultural production increased, it would also help the Lord. Although he had good intentions, Lowell strongly objected that, Lord, Piero was an irreplaceable force. Ridan's defense would suffer a great loss. But in contrast to Lowell, Grid laughed comfortably and said, the more you can't do it, the more you want to do it. Alright, I'm counting on you. Piero received his support and happily smiled and said, sure enough, only the Lord understands me. Agriculture is the root of all things. I will prove that there are no limits. Even in this sea. But Lowell still couldn't accept it. He called out Grid's ID. But he just let out a sigh and smiled helplessly in response. How can we stop those who are impatient because they can't sow seeds when all they can see is land? Of course Grid understood why Lowell was so opposed. He regained his serious expression and said, don't worry. We'll be able to fill Piero's void. We still have ordinary soldiers. Asmafel stood right behind Piero, startled. Piero also turned his head to look at him. He nodded slightly and smiled. If it was Asmafel, the walls of Ridan would have advanced even further. However, my heart is always with my lord. If he calls, I will immediately run over. Even though Grid trusted him and mentioned him as an important person, Asmafel was still quite sad and disappointed that he was called a common soldier. It was true that he still had not received the trust of his lord. But he also told himself that he could not back down just because of these resentments. It was all due to his own shortcomings. And no matter what it was called, from now on it would be the sword he pursued, thinking of this and secretly deciding to try his best. Asmafel regained his composure and calmed his mind, his expression became serious. His voice also became determined as he said. Asmafel would never betray the trust of his people. This was the moment when the obsession of the second position was strongly activated, and it was also the day the legend of the ordinary soldier was born. The person who would later shake the world. It was finally time to say goodbye, Maxong said with some regret. He would be leaving now, may the sea god's protection be with him always. Grid nodded and smiled, I will bring you good news. King Maxong. Euphemina gently walked closer to him and softly called out, Your Majesty. When she saw Maxon looking down and paying attention to her, she softly spoke. He could not forget the princess. His Majesty must have kept her in the deepest place in his heart. No matter how much your Majesty endures. Then sometimes those difficult emotions will spill over into tears. Euphemina placed her hand on her heart. Her face and voice were filled with sincerity as she said, Please keep those tears and send them to us. By incorporating His Majesty's love for Ohong into our sword, we will be able to save even more lives. It would be wrong to say that he was not moved by these words, but for someone like Maxon who had always been rigid and serious, of course he wouldn't show it, he just slightly bowed his head and replied hoarsely. It was as if her travel story had brought me a lot of comfort. If it had been incorporated into her prop, it would have been as if Ohong had accompanied her. After this short conversation, everyone could see the sincerity of the Water King Maxon, because there was not much time left. So Grid used the mass teleportation technique to open the door to another world. After the international tournament, the battle with the Water Tribe suddenly happened. In a kingdom under the deep sea, the traces of the high-end goods group still remained. Those footsteps that day marked the end of the war and the beginning of many legends, from Euphemia, who was happily waving goodbye. Asmafel, who was still hesitant, was gently pressed against the back by Piero and pushed inside. Until Grid, who was smiling with his eyes curved. He also smiled brightly and raised his hand to wave goodbye. And that was also a challenge that the elite club set for the new powerhouses. Everyone seemed to be very relaxed and almost had nothing to regret anymore. Only Piero was a little worried. Because when he thought about it, he seemed to have said that he would teach Huron how to plant wheat in the evening. But now there was no other way. Piero himself had always been a positive person, so he quickly calmed down. Hand raised to rub chin, mouth clicked tongue and said, "It will be fine, huh?" Grid returned home and Irene was waiting there. Seeing Grid, she happily hugged him. Grid hugged her happily. Irene didn't know how long it had been since we last saw each other. Irene was filled with joy. "Yes, it really has been a long time. How was the trip?" Grid replied. Actually, he had come here a few days ago, but because his teammates needed help, he had to leave for a while. Sorry. Anyway, Lord was by his side, so he trusted him and left. Irene smiled gently. Don't worry about it, just look back at what you've accumulated after all the hardships you've gone through. If you don't pack your bag soon, you'll miss your next trip. Grid was quite stunned, he thought. The rewards of the international tournament, the spoils of the mermaid race, and establishing a relationship with the demon sword Irugged. It was time to put an end to the achievements of the past month and a half. Looking at the obedient and understanding wife before him, Grid thought. Even though he didn't show it, she could still understand his emotional overload. What a wonderful wife. She is the only one who can protect herself until the end. Grid immediately picked Irene up and said, if that's the case then let's enjoy the vacation first. Irene was lifted up, hugging Grid's neck and shyly said, husband. The return of the mermaid expedition, what they need now is new luggage. Faker and Grid stood talking to each other. Grid said in surprise, you said you won't accept cruiser pants, are you sober, Faker? I'll give it to you for cheap. Faker said slowly, I know this is a very valuable item but it's a bit too much for me. I've been helped a lot by you. The fact that only we get your items is already a good treatment. You could have sold the items to rich people, but instead you spent money to produce equipment for us. You are the only one who doesn't realize how many people you have helped. Stop giving in and leave it to yourself. Grid understood Faker's worries and shyness, so he smiled lightly inside. Do you think I'll be agile enough to survive if I wear that armor and jeans? Moreover, everyone gives me the materials and crafting methods every time, and you guys are the ones who give me free experience and even buy it for me. Your equipment is better, so I can fight more comfortably. What kind of treatment? If I put it up for auction and people buy it, will you take responsibility? Then Grid didn't beat around the bush. Even if Faker refused, he still sent it to his inventory. The system notified, you have received the item. Grid continued, if Euphemina is our hidden gem, then you are the invisible pillar supporting the elite club. Everyone knows how strong you are in the dark. So stop being stubborn and take it. Faker was touched but still sighed. It was hard to refuse him. I understand, I will try to become strong to become a trustworthy guardian of the guild. Oh, can I pay in installments? Grid looked at this pink smile and wondered if it was fake. Grid said, I know, stop smiling, looking at handsome people is annoying. At this time, in another place, Euphemina was fiddling with Numud's magic book. The system messaged, unknown rank, unknown usage effect, unknown usage conditions. In short, it was a vague book. The system said, this was an ancient book containing the magic of the genius mage Numud. Euphemina looked at it suspiciously, the reward of the mermaid tribe's quest, an unknown rank magic book. Euphemina let out a sigh and muttered, but even if the copy magic can copy skills, I can't learn them. No matter what it contains, if I accidentally open it, I might lose the precious magic book, maybe it's better to sell it to Zednos or Liella. She fell into deep thought after using the appraisal skill. The appraisal skill didn't work either. Numud was a genius that even Braham had to fear, so this seemed like a super item. The grimoire of someone who had surpassed a legendary mage, yet he was handing it over to someone else. If it were me, even if it was deadly poison, I would pour it into my mouth and swallow it all. Euphemina made up her mind and decided to open this mysterious book to explore. Grid, I believe you. When the book opened, the system displayed a notification. You are reading MUMA's magic book. Intelligence below 5K cannot accept new knowledge. Failure in absorbing knowledge. Just as Euphemina predicted. Failure is indeed not possible. But suddenly, before Euphemina could despair, the system announced. You are blessed with the protection of the sea god thanks to the effect of the title of the guardian of the mermaid tribe. MUMA's knowledge is supporting you. The knowledge is being rearranged to make it easier to understand. Euphemina was stunned. After a while, the system reported again. MUMA's magical knowledge is being transmitted to your brain. You have completed absorbing new knowledge. The MUMA magic tree has opened. Your constitution is not suitable for learning fire attribute MUMA magic. Wood attribute MUMA magic. Earth attribute MUMA magic. You have learned water attribute MUMA magic. You have learned non-attribute MUMA magic. Legendary water attribute MUMA magic. Stage 1 growth. Magic power can be converted into water and ice, can be used as needed. Legendary non-attribute MUMA magic. Stage 1 growth. The effect of ignoring 30% of magic defense will be applied to your magic power. The hidden advancement quest to free MUMA's soul has been created. Euphemina was stunned when she read this. Thinking back, MUMA was a genius. Despite being terminally ill, he devoted his entire life to studying magic and establishing a system of magical theory that anyone could easily use. Having built a legacy that left its mark in the history of magic, MUMA thought that he could now be satisfied with his life. But when his achievements were stolen by his blind master out of jealousy of Braham, he was shocked and filled with resentment. After swearing revenge, MUMA created his own magical formula to surpass Braham and determined to go to Siren to find the powerful orbs. But he met a water girl from the mermaid tribe, and in his short time, instead of clinging to resentment, he wished for happiness with her. And in the end, he did not seek revenge. What a beautiful love story. And then MUMA passed away happily after his last days with her, but he didn't even get to rest in peace after his death. His body was taken over by someone who was in the pact with Baal, turning it into a murderous doll. The mission that the book gives right now is to please save the siren that MUMA loves and free MUMA's crying soul with the power you have just obtained. The completion condition is to destroy the lich MUMA who is in the hands of the one who is contracted with Baal and free its soul. The reward will unlock all MUMA's magic, receive the legendary growth profession of MUMA's descendant. Euphemina read the quest with her eyes wide open in disbelief. The legendary growth profession was not just a simple magic book. Like a golden stocking, Euphemina ran to the castle, rushed to hug Grid and said with a bright smile. Grid was still stunned and said huh when she hugged him and said, "Thank you." Grid fell back and scratched his head. "What's going on? Could it be a magic book? Don't tell me it's really good," Euphemina replied. Well, if it wasn't for Grid, who knows how long the trip would have taken. Grid thought with a smile, Euphemina sacrificed a lot to help Ridan. I'm glad she succeeded. A girl who devoted all her time to Ridan and the mermaid tribe and the luxury goods club. Grid replied, "Thank me, you deserve to be rewarded more than anyone else you know." In the end, all that effort created the opportunity for the biggest leap. Grid patted Euphemina's head, who was moved to tears, and said. While little Lord behind him seemed to have some misunderstanding, his father also had a lover. So cool. Grid helplessly turned dark and quickly said, "No way." Grid sat at the forge and looked over with admiration. The quest that Euphemina shared was amazing. Although it was a growth type, it started from legendary level. If true, the unexplored level is said to be the next stage of mythical level legends. The mythical realm that was said to be possible only when Pagma's techniques and Braham's magic were fused together. MUMA's successor could only aim at his magical skills. Braham poked his head in to listen and said, "This is MUMA. If he lives longer he might surpass not only you but also Muller." Grid was surprised and excited. Even the Sword Saint Muller, amazing. The strongest profession will protect me, huh? Braham laughed coldly at that. This guy didn't care at all. It was surprising to see his ignorance when cheering for the senior, but who was protecting who really? His potential was much greater than that. He was truly an amazing guy. Braham continued to speak to Grid, but this was not easy. Could he defeat the strongest player currently, the one who had contracted with Baal? Even the Holy Sword Muller could not defeat Pagma. He possessed the power of Baal. Facing Braham's question, Grid calmly said, "We have to fight to know." Braham assessed. Still as reckless as ever. Well, if you're wondering who the new contractor is, you'll need to ask the people who met the necromancer in Vampire City. At this time, Lowell stopped by the forge and looked at the quest and exclaimed, "The reward is a legendary growth class. Euphemina's quest is great." Grid replied, "Right. Anyway, I heard you guys saw a million necromancers in Vampire City. Is it related to the guy named ? In that quest?" Lowell thought to himself at Grid's question. The worst player shouldn't be mentioned unless he was sure he could eliminate him. He had intentionally forgotten about it, but this big reward ended up being a quest related to him. Lowell fought back, neither Yehoka nor he could block Grid's access anymore. Realizing that he had to tell Grid everything, Lowell frankly revealed that he was Agnes, a necromancer who appeared in the vampire city and was the one who made a pact with Baal at that time. Grid thought to himself and excitedly asked Lowell. Epic career advancement players like Euphemina, Katz, and the recognized overall 5th rank player like Yura were also in the hunting grounds. Grid was full of interest. Oh great, call everyone, I'll find him and attack him. No matter how strong he is, he won't be able to withstand a group attack. Hearing that, Lowell shook his head in refusal. No, he explained to Grid the current situation. There were a lot of tasks and internal work that had been left behind while the members were away from the city due to the international tournament and the war at the Mermaid Tribe. Furthermore, Aslan, who has become the king of Saharan, is holding us back by accusing us of assassinating Prince Zen. We do not have enough strength to fight, but if we were forced to choose an opponent, the closest mission would be the Eternal Royal Family. Grid pouted and said, why are you so negative? If Euphemina advances her class, we can defeat both Eternal and Agnes at the same time, right? Lowell continued to explain. Jasuka and I tried to delay his conflict with Grid as much as possible. He has a huge army of liches, death knights, and other forces. Follow his madness and swear allegiance to him. Since there are no outside activities like war, he will spend all his time on development. Lowell continued. Above all, Agnes's fighting power alone was at least several times greater than his lord's. That was because it was a national-level fighting power that had surpassed the scope of players. He was currently an invincible opponent. Furthermore, it was obvious that Agnes was always making others miserable because he was a psychopath. So I wanted to avoid him, but if I couldn't avoid him because of Euphemina's mission, then let's deal with Eternal's matter and plan for the future. Seeing Lowell's helplessness and analysis, Grid sighed dejectedly. Even Braham said so. This guy seems to be highly regarded, it hurts his pride. The advisor's opinion cannot be taken lightly. I understand. After Lowell left, it was already dark. Grid sat in the forge and took out several items from his inventory. There was a large adamantium stone. This was a mineral that could only be collected in Asgard, the world of the gods. It had the properties of maximizing the durability, hardness, and brittleness that the manufacturer desired, but there were still limitations. It contained powerful divine power, so it was also very complicated. Grid stared at the adamantium for a while, examining it and evaluating it. Just like Bai Yi, people stronger than him were gradually appearing. It was time to change his teeth. The core problem was how to use this guy. While he was lost in thought, Braham poked his head out again and asked, oh, adamantium, other than vibranium, is a mineral comparable to bloodstone. Are you planning to use it to make armor? Because you always get beaten up. Grid almost wanted to stare straight through Braham. He said, no defense is enough. The triad is also comparable to Lantier. He fell into a deep thought again. If he used it on the light armor, the defense would increase, but it would be a waste since there were very few opponents that were strong in both magic and physical attacks. The urgent thing now was the attack power. Ayarog did not listen, so the gap grew larger. But even if I made a weapon with this, the problem would still be the blackening. Using blackening while equipped with adamantium would mean that divine power and magical energy would collide. I had suffered enough of that excruciating punishment. This made Grid so troubled that he bit his nails and stomped his feet on the ground, his face grimacing as he muttered, these two divine powers are very necessary for the remaining gatekeepers in Bihan and Agnes Lich. Braham sneered, you plan to blow your head off in front of the enemy with two completely opposite powers? It must be worth seeing. Grid said, stop meddling in other people's business. Are you sure your head won't explode? A thought suddenly flashed through Grid's mind, and he widened his eyes and said, that's right, your head won't explode. Grid grinned. Then I don't have to use the weapon myself, right? Like the Thousand Hands specialized weapon. Braham heard that and said, this idea is funny, the swordsmanship of the sword god Sata. It's not a threat. Ignoring Braham's words, Grid was still stroking his chin and focusing on his idea, if I do it like this. Like this, all I have to do is attack properly, then the opponent will be very tired, huh? Braham sighed and commented, speaking of planned attacks, there was no way such a simple weapon could exist. Grid said, if we attached a nose properly to it, we could chase the target all the way to the afterlife. Detect that the magic will track the captured target's mana to the end. Add it to the Thousand Hands. It will have infinite durability, 100% hit rate, and is the safest weapon we don't have in our hands. Braham was shocked to hear that. He said, one could think of it as similar to magic arrows, but magic arrows are very complicated. It is very difficult to implant high energy mana materials. There are different waves and shapes, furthermore developing it to allow for analysis and tracking detection is on a whole other level. Grid scratched his head and smiled shyly, you can't transform magic, can you become a version for 1,000 hands to use? Braham can't do that, What can I do? Faced with Grid's provocative words, Braham turned to shout at him, "It's not that I can't do this, it's as easy as pie for me, damn it, don't provoke me." Grid said, "You are also excited, right? The power of a synthesis product created by a legendary Grand Mage and a legendary blacksmith. Something that will surprise the world is taking shape." Seeing the shadow of his old friend appear in Grid, Braham was surprised, so sweet. The profound knowledge of a mere human being in our conversations lasted all night long. The sense of accomplishment and self-esteem that comes from being able to stay up all night and create something again after failing and being so hurt after being abandoned. Braham gritted his teeth, he never wanted to feel that pain again. What am I thinking now? Holding on to disappointment and expectations for someone other than myself. I have become so weak. Even if they didn't want to admit it, there were still some who surpassed the legends who came before them in some aspects. Braham looked at Grid and thought. The leap of a new generation of players, a generation that would threaten even the vampire Marie Rose and the most powerful demons. My time has passed. But I am still haunted by resurrection in life. It is time to leave it all behind. Braham just stood there in silence until Grid spoke up. Where are you going on your own? Don't even dream about it until you teach me all the magic. This one sentence made Braham wake up. I have controlled him so that he can't hear my heart. I'm too attached. But attached? Perhaps this is the biggest difference between Pagma and this guy. Pagma, you have obtained power but are extremely cruel towards the goal of world peace. On the other hand, the only thing this guy protects is himself and his teammates around him. In comparison, he is an extremely small person. Braham smirked and said, if you want to learn all my magic, even if you are born 100 times, it will not be enough. You must keep me forever, a mere human who wants to be recognized. And I can't even think about abandoning this person by my side. Grid said to Braham, it is said that magic is great but also very difficult to learn. Therefore it is also of little value. Braham listened and silently judged. What a stupid legend. Hearing that he was being criticized, Grid was so mad that he wanted to beat Braham to death with a stick. He shouted, what do you want, you old monkey? You want to die, you bastard, you talk too much. An old Khan stood there watching, tears streaming down his face. No matter how hard he tried outside, when he came back here, everything was almost like new. Okay, so let's get started. Grid opened the blueprint and started creating. System notification. The current number of items that can be created for the legendary blacksmith creation is 11 out of 24. Braham asked. The main weapon must be a sword, right? Grid smiled and replied. I told you, the goal is to ensure an accurate attack with the center of gravity proportional to the hit. Even when swung lightly it should deal consistent damage and be easy to hold. So this time it's the hammer. Braham thought back to the battles that had taken place and said. Although the impact force of a blunt weapon like a hammer was quite even, its center of gravity was tilted to one side, resulting in a large deviation. Since there was no choice between stabbing or slashing, the maneuverability in combat seemed to be lower. The reason why experts mainly used swords was because it had the perfect balance between offense and defense. Grid silently praised after hearing that. As expected, your knowledge of weapons and attacks is still very good. He replied, after creating the hammer, I have already come up with a plan to create a sword to replace Iarugd. As for the Thousand Hand, it has infinite durability, so in case of a counterattack, just try to dodge it. If the weapon is a hammer, combining items that are difficult to use in actual combat can also shorten the time. Grid continued to work on the creation. He had his own calculations. The handle was made from Drake's fangs, with the strength and elasticity to absorb the impact of the blow. A rope made from Ogre's tendon was attached to the handle so that he could aim and throw it at enemies at a distance. The head is made of the largest and heaviest adamantium possible, focusing on precision and destructive power. Increase thermal conductivity to allow for faster refining when combining other items together. Melt the tears of the Water King to bind it with magic. After a while of struggling with the drawing, Grid said quite proudly. After all, I am a legendary blacksmith, so nothing can be difficult for me. The person who understands hammers the most is me. The design is complete, Grid said excitedly. Good. Braham stood there watching and said. Oh, it really does give off a sense of intimidation and fear, you just need to give it a suitable name. It's time for the hard part with Grid again. Hearing Braham mention it, Grid was stunned. Oh, that's right. What about the adamantium hammer? Braham said, frustrated. You used all your intelligence on the design. Fortunately, Lowell, with his much smarter head, came to help. There was a mythical weapon with the same power as it. It is the weapon of the thunder god Thor and is meant to destroy. What about Mjolnir? Grid wondered if Mjolnir meant destruction. That's fine, let's take that name. Lal approached and said. Khan was worried that he was losing his mind from talking to himself. Luckily I got here before he could think of another shocking name. Grid pointed at the blueprint and said to Lal. Something amazing is coming soon, want to check it out? Just as he named it, the system notified him. An item with the same name already exists. Give it a random name to differentiate it. Grid looked at it blankly and said. It seems like a lot of people like this name. The design of the legendary Mjolnir version of the ultimate delivery. Legendary information growth. Attack power 790 to 1400. Accuracy plus 35%. Increased throw speed will definitely cause a slight stun for 0.1 seconds each time the target is hit, reducing the durability of any objects hit. Deals an additional 2400 fixed damage to demons and undead, has a high chance of causing fear to the target identified as an enemy. Increases the proficiency speed of blacksmith-related skills, currently there is no bound magic. Prerequisites for using level 350 or higher. Strength 3000 or higher. Dexterity 2500 or higher. A prop created by the legendary blacksmith Grid, crafted from the divine or adamantium. It is a versatile hammer that can exert absolute power in both destruction and creation. Depending on the level of development, it is a weapon that can rival the weapon of the God Enjourner. Lal opened his mouth in surprise and said, I thought it would be about the level of a failure, but look at these stats. Grid smiled proudly and said, it has the potential to grow compared to a god's weapon, isn't it great? Grid proudly declared, Agnes or something, tell him to go crazy right now, I'm becoming invincible in this forge. Braham heard this and once again fell into deep thought. Pagma, you killed me because I am a vampire. You talk nonsense about peace, but in the end you join hands with the devil. Don't underestimate me. In hell, Pagma, I will make you regret choosing to betray me to join Ball and the others. My help was not wasted, you will surely grow very well together with your descendants. After a while of focusing on the finished item, Grid screamed madly. Damn, it's a top-notch item. Then he threw it back into the forge without mercy. Braham looked on appraisingly. It had been 4 years since I threw everything I made into the forge without hesitation. It had been 15 days and his concentration was beyond imagination. Using the high durability of adamantium and Drake's Fawn, he intended to repeat the forging process until the hammer reached legendary status, surpassing Pagma's. No, the concentration he had now was comparable to when Mumud was researching magic. Even though he was just an incomparable idiot, his only weapon was his will that was much stronger. If he had more talent, he would be able to develop at a terrifying rate. Would that be wonderful or pitiful? Braham secretly evaluated Grid. A few days later in another place, Ayarukt was having a hard time. He sat on a large rock and thought about life. Thanks to regaining his strength, I was finally able to show my true form. But that damn Grid, has he forgotten me since that day? The demon race always follows the principle of the big fish eating the small fish. Among them I am the naturally strong one, having to serve a weak bastard as my master. How ridiculous. It seemed that Ayarukt was very dissatisfied with his current situation. He clenched his fists and silently vowed, I will discipline you and make you my servant. Reason tells us to hunt our prey relentlessly, eliminate them and revive with perfect strength. A blade forged just to cut that man. I can never forgive you for looking down on the ultimate swordplay that I have cultivated all my life. Your soul sealed for 200 years, your torture will soon rise again. 29th Great Demon Zepar, this time I will definitely cut you to pieces. Suddenly a crack appeared above his head and Grid's voice was heard. Come out here, Ayarukt. Seeing the opportunity come, Ayarukt thought, finally. Then he crawled out of the seal. He saw Grid and said, so sweet. Grid felt bad when he heard that. Every time you appear, you say the same thing, don't you get bored? Ayarukt laughed after hearing that. Just when I was about to tell you about the master-servant relationship, you called me out of the blue. This bastard was born to be beaten. Try kneeling down first. Ayarukt rushed to attack but was immediately blocked by Grid. Looking at Grid's weapon, Ayarukt was surprised. It's the first time I've seen a jet black sword. What is this? He shouted. You think you can close the gap with me with just a new toy like that? You're still too young. As soon as he finished speaking, Grid swung his sword and cut his sword in half. Ayarukt was stunned. The sword split in two. Grid spoke. You think you are on par with me, kneel down, Ayarukt. He heard and said angrily. How shallow, I must give this guy a super sword strike. Before he could attack, one of Grid's toys rushed over and held him back. He quickly dodged. The divine hand was useless, my magic I could see every sword strike. It could have been avoided. But life was not a dream. Grid's new hammer stood in front of him, blocking his way. Ayarukt was scared. No way. A series of attacks sent Ayarukt sprawling in pain. What the hell is that hammer? The destructive power is too terrifying. Even that annoying divine power. Furthermore, Grid said, it's absolutely unavoidable. Then Grid slashed Ayarukt with his sword, causing him to cry out in pain. Grid said with a smile. Good luck, see you tomorrow. Then he decided to send Ayarukt to the sword. He was reluctant to say what? But still have to accept fate. Braham stood watching, silently evaluating. He was by no means a weak opponent. That old devil Ayarukt, although he was a ghost and his magical energy was extremely weak. But the swordsmanship he displayed in the battle with Maxon was similar to that of a pure-blood vampire baron. If he had a perfect body when he was alive, there would be no doubt about his power as a great demon. Grid, who was now holding the hammer in his hand, fought proudly, overwhelming all opponents. Mjolnir's accuracy and attack power exceeded expectations. Braham wanted to praise but still had a hint of sarcasm in his tone. Leading the battle with just one ridiculous weapon, how interesting. Grid was praised and started talking endlessly. It's all thanks to the discovery of the strengthening magic you taught me. Although the detection range has been reduced to 1m, the ability to pursue the target has been enhanced, the hit rate increases by 50% and up to 85% at legendary rank. So it can be considered a sure hit. But since it is a blunt weapon, it does not deal maximum damage. On the other hand, blunt weapons have a much higher chance of dealing minimum damage. Ayarukt's maximum health was only around 10,000 and his defense was even lower. Perhaps because he was configured with soul and magic power, his body was as thin as a piece of paper. That was probably why he was able to win. However, he will play a decisive role in deadly battles. Grid analyzed to Braham while thinking to himself. He has the attack power to make up for his weak defense, and his powerful swordsmanship is clearly superior to the enemy's attacks. He is currently at a low compatibility level with Kraugel, but if he regains his power, he is undoubtedly the strongest Archon, and must be tamed. After hearing this, Braham was quite curious and asked Grid, could that sword make up for Mjolnir's lacking attack power? Grid picked up the jet black sword and said that although Mjolnir was something that could counter Ayarukt with his paper-thin body, this guy had created an opening. The system now gives a series of information. Legendary rank magic sword. Attack power 1836, can be split into many small and large pieces. When split into small pieces, it will have 930 attack power. And the large piece will have 1480 attack power. With each hit on the same target, 10% attack power will be stacked up to a maximum of 100%. Can use the downward slash skill, usage condition level 360 or higher. Advanced swordsmanship proficiency level 7 or higher, strength 2500 or higher. Dexterity 3000 or higher. This is a sword created by the legendary blacksmith Grid. It was designed to exert more attack power. It has two handles, which are difficult to distinguish with the naked eye. When hit with the handle, it can cause dizzying damage. The materials are drake's fangs, claws, bones, and scales. It can be said that the entire drake has been reduced to this sword. Grid thought to himself. Compared to human minerals, it would take 29 days to combine the sub-details of a great drake. Thanks to the carefully calculated separation function, the weaknesses were also exploited properly. On top of that, even though it was a one-handed sword, it had higher durability and attack power than the Scrappen Mjolnir, a crazy ultimate weapon was born. Braham continued to wonder. So can that ghost be subdued with this? Grid replied with a laugh. How can that be? Ayarukt with its crimson blood color claimed to be a demon sword, so I named it a demon sword. There's still a long way to go before I can change my habits. I have to do it properly to silence him. But first we have to make it unbreakable. Now it's time to strengthen it. In Grid's wooden house and forge. Looking at the pile of items that had just been placed on the table, Braham immediately asked, 50 normal enhancement stones, 10 lucky enhancement stones, you have the technique of the enhancement master Pagma, is it necessary to prepare so many? Beside him, Grid's table was filled with exorcism and good luck items. He wore a yellow headband embroidered with red letters that looked like a talisman, a rosary on his wrist, and a cross in his hand. His entire body exuded a dark aura. His voice carried anger as he said, this is bad luck, shut up. Do you think this is easy? After saying that, he threw the crossbow and rosary aside, picked up a reinforcement stone, and thought with a serious expression. This number was definitely not much. From the beginning, the passive skill, which increased the chance of reinforcement, had never worked properly. From +6 onwards, the chance of reinforcement failure was very high, and if it failed with a normal reinforcement stone, the reinforcement value would decrease by 3. A property window appeared in front of the enhancement stone. The weapon enhancement stone was lucky when the enhancement was successful. The enhancement value was +1 to +3. When the enhancement failed, the enhancement value was -1. Grid affirmed with satisfaction. This would help reduce the enhancement penalty as much as possible, but this alone cost 2,500 gold each, which was almost 3 million. He gritted his teeth. Although he was reluctant and helpless, it was already very expensive from the start because of the extremely strange drop rate. When the number of high-level players increased, the price also doubled. Even when users complained, the game publishers didn't listen. Thinking about the hardships of forging this hammer, Grid thought to himself, but after 29 days of continuous production and destruction, he finally obtained Mjolnir, perfected to legendary level. One of Drake's fangs was broken, and the durability of adamantium had also reached its limit. Turning his gaze to the enhancement stones on the table, he made up his mind. I must successfully enhance the items I have worked so hard to create with the 10 stones I have in hand. My goal is the magic sword in 4 Mjolnirs, reaching at least a +8. He continued to clasp his hands, his face full of reverence as he prayed. I also didn't expect to reach the final enhancement level that no one had ever succeeded in, which was +10. When I reached +5, I just needed to apply the lucky enhancement stone to add 3 more. Please finish it in one go. After praying, Grid immediately began to strengthen. Ordinary strengthening stones floated around the body of Mjolnir. Countless green light points gathered in the middle, merging into the red stone on the body of the hammer. The enhancement process ended. Grid breathed a sigh of relief. The optional stats were still the same, but he had still achieved +5 without fail. Anyway, the option changes for high-level items started from +8 onwards. He held a lucky enhancement stone in his right hand and the magic sword in his left hand. He closed his eyes and growled. Now was the time to decide the winner. Add 3 in one go. Make it worthy of the name. Lucky enhancement stone. After saying that, Grid immediately placed the lucky enhancement stone on the magic sword. The green effect appeared again. A window popped up with a notification. The enhancement +1 was successful. The magic sword +6 was completed. Grid's whole body trembled, his face filled with disbelief as he spoke loudly. Damn it, even if it was +7, it would be acceptable, but +6. +6, or is this a normal enhancement stone worth 3 million? Braham said in frustration, already getting angry at the beginning. Grid turned his head and picked up another lucky enhancement stone. Pretending to be calm, he said, who's angry, it's just starting now. There are still 9 lucky enhancement stones left. With that, he placed the stone on top of Mjolnir. The enhancement effect continued to appear. A notification window appeared. Enhancement +1 successful, +6 Mjolnir. 1 completed. Grid changes item. Continues to use a lucky enhancement stone. Notification window pops up. Enhancement +1 successful, +6 Mjolnir. 2 completed. Grid was furious that all 3 enhancements were +1. He shouted angrily. Give me back the 9 million. Those damn publishers. He imagined the image of the game publisher with a devilish appearance constantly tempting him. Buy more enhancement stones. Get to +10. Seeing him lose his composure, Braham said. It's impossible to enhance such a powerful weapon so easily. So don't get excited. The enhancement only needs to focus on the results. Grid closed his eyes. He remembered the saying. If you put your heart and soul into the work, the results will always be satisfactory. His mind gradually calmed down. He thought to himself. This was what Khan always emphasized. Calm down and do it again. After thinking, Grid picked up the 3rd Mjolnir. Enhancement successful. A notification window appeared. Enhancement +1 successful. Add 7 Mjolnir. Done. Grid immediately smiled confidently. 2 all right. If you don't have any ambitions, it will take effect immediately. He thought about it. 1 then +2. Now it's probably +3. With this momentum, the 4th Mjolnir will be successful too. But the next notification window appeared. Enhancement +1 completed. Add 6 Mjolnir. 4 completed. Grid gritted his teeth. His face was full of fear and he growled. Again. No. It was my fault. After +2, of course I was looking forward to +3. The price of enhancement stones made me impatient, so I kept forgetting the basics. Again. He closed his eyes to calm himself down. He told himself. Let this impatience fly away like a hammer in the fire, burning away the turbid thoughts in his soul. More peaceful. Calm. Then he opened his eyes. Picked up another lucky enhancement stone and told himself. Just stay steady and enjoy the process. A reminder window popped up. Use lucky weapon enhancement stone with +6 demon sword. The strengthening process this time is a bit different. A red light appears. 2 prompt screens appear. Strengthening +6 demon sword. Failed. Strengthening index decreases by 1. Becomes +5 demon sword. The teacher announced. Grid looked calm. He was unreasonably happy. So happy. Upgrade and then return. How interesting. Consecutive use of enhancement stone 3 times. 3 notification boards appeared one after another. Add 6 Mjolnir failed. Enhancement stat decreased by 1. Becomes +5 Mjolnir. 1. Add 6 Mjolnir. 2. Add failed. Enhancement stat decreased by 1. Becomes +5 Mjolnir. 2. Becomes +5 Mjolnir. 4. Grid read it and immediately collapsed to his knees. 9,000,001 disappeared. 12,000,001 disappeared. Braham closed his eyes. He said in disappointment. He dreamed of becoming the greatest blacksmith but was discouraged after a few failures. That's youth. The journey to becoming the greatest is a journey that goes far beyond this simple enhancement. The challenges ahead will be much more difficult. Grid angrily picked up a lucky enhancement stone. Ah. Shut up. You don't even know how much money I've lost. There's only 1 lucky stone left that I prepared. He smashed the 3,000,001 worth of weapon enhancement stone into Mjolnir. At the same time, he shouted. All right. Fight to the end. You dirty bastards. Let's see how far we can go. The prompt window popped up. Use lucky weapon enhancement stone to add 7 Mjolnir. 3. Grid didn't expect much, but the next announcement surprised him. The +3 enhancement was successful. He opened his eyes wide and read the message on the window. Add 10 Mjolnir. 3. Completed. Title obtained. Rare lucky person. Special stats. Luck has been unlocked. Congratulations. You are the first player to obtain the ultimate enhanced weapon. Grid was still bewildered. 10. He shouted loudly. +10. Ha ha ha. The nonsense was over. His face showed disbelief. Previously, there was a Vietnamese talent who spent tens of billions to buy lucky enhancement stones and enhancement rate statistics. According to those statistics, the probability of getting +1 with lucky enhancement stones from +7 or higher is less than 0.01%, in other words, the probability of failure is 99.9%. He continued to think. So the strategy of adding 9 to achieve adding 3 in one use from adding 6 became the trend. From the beginning, everyone gave up on strengthening from adding 7 onwards. Grid opened his eyes wide as he observed the golden light emitted from the first +10 weapon in the game. Thinking back, +5 was quite easy for him. But not everyone was 100% successful. However, for someone who wasn't even a tycoon like him to have reached +10, it couldn't be explained by probability. He ripped off the amulet-like bandage on his head, thinking excitedly, Pagma's Descendant's passive skill increased the chance of enhancing items. Finally, Pagma's Descendant's power had come into play, and the one who had tried until the end was none other than himself. Thinking of this, he shouted. I did it. I did it. Braham, who was standing beside him, also looked in disbelief and thought to himself, ultimate enhancement. That was a feat that even Pagma had only been able to do a few times. He smiled slightly, although he was extremely casual and easily swayed, he was still Pagma's descendant after all. My heart was also in it, so I was proud of him. Grid picked up the Mjolnir hammer +10. I finally faced my misfortune and overcame it, even if today's luck returned a bigger misfortune, as long as I continued to overcome it. He affirmed that in the end, there would still be a steel weapon left. The hammer's attribute window appeared before Grid's eyes, the ultimate enhanced Mjolnir, the transfer version. Attack power 1333.2363, accuracy +50%, acceleration will increase when thrown, each time the target is hit, it will cause a 0.3 second stun state. The durability of any object hit is reduced, except your own, dealing an additional 3,800 true damage to demons and undead, with a high chance of causing fear in enemies. The proficiency of blacksmithing-related skills is increased faster than detect magic. Transmutation, which has been added to Mjolnir, increases the accuracy of steel by 50%. After reading that long attribute table, Grid smiled with satisfaction. The optional increase in stats was huge. But the minimum attack power was already close to 1333. The only drawback of weapons with weak attack power had been overcome, which was a great success. While Grid was thinking, a bell icon appeared, followed by a pop-up notification window. The cooldown of the skill, Summon Demon Sword Iarugd, had returned. He immediately said in surprise, "Oh, that's right." Grid smiled confidently, "I should probably show my face a bit." "Iarugd, I just need a friend to brag about, don't be sad." In some dark space, the Demon Sword Iarugd sat on a pile of rocks, calling out. "Grid." He continued, "I tried to subdue you and use you as a tool for my revival. There were no enemies around, so the reason you summoned me yesterday was to warn me." With that, Iarugd cursed inwardly, "You impudent, you worm, daring to challenge me." That alone was absurd enough, but it was true. He resignedly thought further, the best swordsman in hell like me lost to someone like that. Even though my power was sealed and I was suddenly attacked by a surprise weapon, it was an absolute humiliation that should not happen. The image of the Mjolnirs attacking at the same time, leaving him unable to react, kept appearing in his mind, Iarugd thought to himself. Furthermore, the four hammers contained deadly divine power that could threaten even the great demons if their attacks were stronger, and for some reason he couldn't avoid those brutal movements. He continued to use his magic, the only way was to hide his fighting intention before using that letter, making him let his guard down and attack by surprise. His pride would be hurt, but that was the only solution right now because there was no way to defeat that hammer. At this moment a voice rang out in the void, "Hey, Iarugd, come out." Hearing the call, Iarugd raised his head and looked up, thinking to himself, submitting to power is the law of the devil. With a cruel smile, Iarugd continued, "The lives I need can only be obtained through victory. Today you will kneel before me, Grid." Blood red light shines. Demon Sword Iarugd, holding a red-bladed sword, responded to Grid's summoning and appeared before him. He took a breath, sweetly. After exclaiming, Iarugd turned to Grid and said, "First of all, I apologize for yesterday's matter." Grid was instantly stunned. Ignoring his reaction, Iarugd placed his hand on his chest and bowed slightly. "I finally committed an impolite act of attacking you, which is an act that goes against the honor of a swordsman." With that, he looked at Grid's bewildered expression and thought, a formal apology from his opponent. If he was polite, he would have come to shake his hand to accept the apology. He chuckled to himself, but that was it, the battle would begin as soon as the handshake took place. If he thrust his sword into that impudent man's head, the perfect revenge. At the same time, a Mjolnir was slowly approaching, preparing to sneak attack him from behind. Iarugd felt it and was surprised. He quickly dodged and cursed loudly, "Shameless bastard," not even daring to fight hand to hand. In his heart, he thought, no matter what, he couldn't avoid it, he had to defend himself first. Iarugd raised his sword to block Mjolnir's strike, a huge surge of power immediately transmitted, surprising him. But when Iarugd realized his guess was wrong, he was sent flying by Mjolnir. He bounced several times on the ground like a stone thrown across a lake. Then he slammed into the wall behind him and let out a miserable scream. A window popped up announcing that the Demon Sword Iarugd, which was originally not meant to withstand strong impacts, had its durability reduced by 80. Iarugd, who was panting heavily, asked in disbelief upon seeing the announcement. What? What? Once again, Mjolnir flew forward and swung its attack. Iarugd was puzzled, this power, that hammer had a different power. Yesterday. He quickly dodged, but it was too late. A Mjolnir hit. The stun effect was activated immediately. Notification windows popped up one after another. The impact from the hammer was too strong, you will be stunned for 0.3 seconds. The impact from the hammer was too strong, you will be stunned for 0.1 seconds. Iarugd growled helplessly. The message window continues to pop up. The impact from the hammer is too strong, you will be stunned for 0.1 seconds. The impact from the hammer is too strong, you will be stunned for 1.3 seconds. After being stunned in a series of attacks, Iarugd knelt on the ground helplessly, unable to block the attack. He opened his mouth wide, his whole body seemed to be in a trance, wondering how he could achieve such power in just one day. On the other side, the hammers had returned to Grid's side. He was silently analyzing, the ultimate enhanced Mjolnir stuns for 0.3 seconds. The other Mjolnir stun for 0.1 seconds. If 4 Mjolnirs attack, it is theoretically possible to continuously stun the opponent. Grid shouldered the magic sword and said to Iarugd, "I don't like your apologetic attitude, so you deserve it. It should have been sent to my master." Iarugd heard that and thought unwillingly. Impossible. I was very vigilant and got another chance. But this time I was completely defeated and couldn't even do anything. Thinking of that, he said loudly, "The best swordsman in hell like me is nothing more than a human. You want me to kneel?" Grid lowered his sword and replied calmly, "Not just a human but also a master. You are so weak that even my weapon cannot defeat you." Iarugd shouted, "Don't show off. The strong thing here is your weapon, not you." Grid blushed with pride and said, "Then think about it, how strong do you think I must be to create such a weapon? Ha 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 ha. With that, he turned away and glanced back. Go in and think about it. See you tomorrow. Tomorrow, at least put away that rude killing intent before going out, okay? Ayarug stammered in horror, you. Before he finished speaking, he was returned to his dark space. After he disappeared, Grid still did not leave. He raised his head to look at Mjolnir with a satisfied, wonderful expression. This was the incredible power that could defeat a powerful enemy without lifting a finger. The narration suddenly appeared. Although he had a powerful item and his control skills had improved significantly recently, there was still one thing he lacked. Grid smiled. Recently heard that a group of 7 super elite members of the guild had completed the conquest of a vampire city in just 5 hours, and still had time to buff the commemorative experience points from the tournament. Finishing his thoughts, Grid spoke. Such overwhelming power had to be used, it would be a shame to throw it away, once again. The narration text appeared. The weak point was that he was still at a relatively low level compared to his competitors. Grid stopped and looked up at the sky, muttering to himself, 5 o'clock, let's see if I can break this record myself. Once again, the narrative shot out. That was the moment, the legend of leveling up, shaking the world was born. At the same time, an attribute window suddenly appeared, the ultimate enhanced Mjolnir item, legendary grade, durability 689 over 689, attack power 1333, 2363, accuracy plus 50%, acceleration will increase when thrown. Each time the target is hit, it will cause a 0.3 second stun state. The durability of any object hit is reduced, except your own, dealing an additional 3,800 true damage to demons and undead, with a high chance of inflicting fear on enemies. The proficiency increased speed of blacksmith-related skills will be cast faster. Magic detection, transformation, has been attached to Mjolnir to increase magic accuracy by 50%. Evening at SA Group headquarters. The announcement sound resounded, attention, attention, a large-scale problem has arisen. A large-scale problem has arisen. The ultimate enhancement item appeared in the game, the player ID successfully enhanced Grid. On the largest screen was the image of Grid's hammer. The people in the audience cheered excitedly, Grid did it. The brown-haired girl stood up in shock and excitement, her heart in turmoil. I was very surprised that all 4 Mjolnirs reached legendary rank in 10 days in real time, the first ultimate enhancement. The initial surprise passed, the brown-haired girl regained her composure and sat down, full of admiration. Grid was so amazing. Thanks to his active participation in the tournament, the management team had been supporting him without her knowing. But even if someone spent tens of billions on enhancement stones, they would never be able to do this. Thinking back to Grid's reckless actions, she was still impressed. A single failure required a huge amount of energy to recover, in a situation where there was no guarantee of reaching legendary rank. He had destroyed an item that had taken him an average of 22 hours to remake multiple times. The red-haired girl thought more and more in admiration and affirmed. This was the result of enduring fatigue and despair for 29 days. I can guarantee that this could only happen to Grid. Looking back at the data on the computer, the brown-haired girl was still shocked by Grid's achievements. She couldn't help but admit it, Grid. No matter what, he had already crafted the legendary Mjolnir and the demon sword more than 15 times. Then she felt curious again. He would definitely receive a big gift, but the only people who knew what it was were Grid and the president's game development team. The more the brown-haired girl thought about it, the more she wanted to know, what was the third special event? She was really curious. If she wanted to know, she absolutely must not be negligent in her future actions. Grid stood in front of the endless desert, contemplating his future plans. The vampire cities that everyone had succeeded in were only 7 out of 15. Numbers 1 to 8, where Marie Rose was likely to appear, were still unfinished. Graham said that Marie Rose was in city number 2. So it seemed like he just needed to go to all the remaining places except that one. After deciding, Grid checked his stats and analyzed the current situation. There were only 2 days left until the experience buff. This was a reward for competitive matches, so he needed to level up more diligently. He must have fallen behind a lot since he was stuck after that international competition. When he looked at the player rankings, he was a little surprised. Kraugel, who had changed his class right after the tournament, and Jibel, who had received a hidden class. Since the first and second ranks had disappeared, the rankings had completely changed. There were also new names that Grid didn't know. He stroked his chin thoughtfully, the one who occupied the vacant throne. Grid. Rank 4 Mando and Agnes, Red and Fawn were the first to hear of them. But it seemed that they were players who rarely appeared but had a level high enough to threaten the existing rankings. Thinking for a moment, he clicked on the lock icon. Ranking, if your goal is to be the top, then it's time to show it. The system immediately popped up asking, after you unlock the unofficial ranking, your level will be visible to all players, do you agree? Grid replied immediately. He jumped down excitedly with the new hammers, of course. What a mess, the preparations were done, so let's go after them. At the headquarters of the Luxury Goods Association, a loud scream rang out. Tobin, Grid, and Tobin heard it and asked curiously, what's going on? Vander, what's making all the noise? Vander still hadn't recovered from his shock. Grid had already been registered on the rankings. Tobin looked at the rankings and laughed like he was having a good time, rank 76. That's incredibly low. Vander felt indignant on Grid's behalf. There was nothing funny about it. Compared to his tournament results, his level was only 306, so the bulletin board was going crazy. He was already recognized. He couldn't understand why he was being criticized when he didn't do anything, honestly. Buying a medal. Lowell calmly smiled and reassured. It's okay, this is the perfect level to start at and then surprise everyone. He thought excitedly in his heart, the challenge of becoming number 1 on the leaderboard has finally begun. Anyway, maybe only a few people can realize that first step of Grid is quite important, but... At the same time, Crowble ran like a ghost in the panel swamp. He did a beautiful flip to avoid a bald guy's attack. Crowble barely dodged the attack, feeling puzzled. Why was the god's equipment in such a low-level hunting ground? The bald guy laughed heartily and praised him. I just received the information that he changed his profession 15 days ago in real time, and he's already level 109. That's amazing. It took a while for Crowble to recognize the bald man's identity. Luck of the Ares Guild. Luck raised his sword and flew over, laughing mockingly. The world's best Crowble, it seems that the wonderful insignia has fallen. From now on, kill me and try to penetrate. Crowble reluctantly could only sword fight with Luck. He was not too surprised by this. Resetting his level after changing his profession, it seemed that he had become the target of every player since that rumor spread. Even so, Crowble thought confidently, but taking me down won't be that easy. Just as he thought that, he was slashed by Luck. The system immediately came online, receiving critical damage. You lost 90% of your health in just one hit. You will fall into a state of shock due to the abnormal state. Having resisted, Crowble quickly retreated to widen the distance. He frowned in disbelief, thinking, just one hit, and almost died. It was truly a fight of different levels. Luck also heard the system announcement and asked. Reset level and even resist stun. You changed to legendary class? He confidently guessed, and if it was that quick movement then there was a high chance he was a sword saint. Luck saw Crowble's surprised expression and sneered before explaining. That expression, it seems like he's wondering how I know? They'll do more missions than usual and their information gathering is excellent. Our guild invades and conquers various cities. That gave us a lot of opportunities to seize ancient documents, so we also got a lot of information about legendary professions. He said and rubbed his forehead, pretending to be bored and sighing. Oh my god, our big brother Ares also needs to quickly level up to legendary level. After all, even though I'm level 335, I can't activate his immortality with one move. Is that because he has those effects? Crowble, who was more disheveled than a rag, replied seriously. It's simple. I'm not weak enough to fall from a swordsman's slash. Luck laughed loudly as if he had heard the joke of the century. That's right, Crowble. That's too arrogant. Then you know what I have to do, right? He said and rushed over. He didn't forget to declare. Show me that head. Not just today. I've been following you around a lot. So don't be too sad. Crowble understood the current situation very well. He glanced at the swamp behind him and thought. There's no way I can win at this level. Luckily, there's a large swamp in this area. Crowble planned his escape with the rock in the middle of the swamp as the center. The only way out was that rock. I would jump on top of the rock with the white light step I learned after becoming a sword saint to lure him. Then use a counterattack to push him into the swamp, slow down his movement speed and escape. Crowble carefully calculated the remaining mana. He had to use the white light set twice in a row to achieve it. So with his current mana level, he had to use a mana recovery potion right after the first white light set. From the footwork, drinking the potion to linking the skills. All had to be done within 0.7 seconds. While Crowble was stressed, he received a voice message asking, Crowble, are you still in Panel Swamp? Do you want me to buy you some medicine? But Crowble didn't have time to reply because he had to dodge Luck's attack. Neither did Alexander. The number of people clinging to him had increased significantly since the tournament. The surroundings were now too chaotic. Even so, Crowble was smiling as he thought, but the one who should change is me. Because now I don't need to defeat anyone except Grid. A guy who caught my attention after the international tournament. Luck keeps attacking and nagging. I'll chase and kill you the whole time you're hanging around here. So give up hunting and just wait 3 months. It's a shame, but if you keep growing at this rate, you'll become a threat to my Ares guild. He pulled his sword back and prepared to attack again. His mouth was working at full capacity. He must have gotten used to being hindered since he became a first-class man. Ares would figure this out in 3 months, so he just had to wait a little longer. But what he didn't know was that Crowbell wasn't listening at all. His mind was filled with Grid. It was said that Grid had finally registered for the ranking. But it seemed that he was determined to compete for the top spot, so it would be difficult for other players to regain the top ranking position. Since Mom was gradually recovering, I could finally enjoy this game more freely. Thinking about that person, Crowbell's fighting spirit grew even more, but now he couldn't stop. While Grid was determined to challenge himself to reach even greater heights, as for luck, Crowbell unceremoniously provoked him, a puppy like him making such an unreasonable request to a tiger like me. Then Crowbell's foot stepped on the tip of Luck's sword. Crowbell called out his name, but before he could wake up, the sky suddenly lit up as if hundreds of car headlights were turning on at the same time. White light. Luck was dazzled, so he squinted and used one hand to block the light and grumbled. Using sunlight to hide, his combat ability was still the same. Luck watched Crowbell, who was shining brightly, run out into the middle of the swamp. Luck shouted a few words of encouragement. How far he had run. Was he trying to escape? Crowbell ran while drinking mana replenishment potion and calculated the time. Recovering mana and continuing with white light step, it only took about a second, but considering the time to catch up, it was enough to do it. Then the red beam of light passed by, causing him to lose his balance, and the mana recovery potion he was drinking fell from his hand. Not only that, the red beam also cut through many things around it. Crowbell cautiously looked behind him, not paying attention to the road ahead. I never thought he would aim straight at the energy field. Both the power and timing were perfect, too dangerous. But Luke stared at Crowbell and said with a sneer, "You think I will dodge? It seems you forgot, at our level, no battle ends with just one move." Hearing that, Crowbell noticed the rock that had been broken into many pieces and was surprised. The rock? It was gone. Luck seemed to have seen through Crowbell's intentions and said gleefully, "If you're going to lure me into the swamp, you should have considered where you could step first, right? This is the swamp I personally chose, so think about how you'll die." But there's no way Crowbell would just give up. If there's no big rock, he can just step on some small pieces. Crowbell skillfully moved between the fragments with skill and proficiency. Now Luck surprised him. Luck hadn't considered this, so he could only slash wildly. What? Moving on that pile of rubble? Levels and stats didn't mean anything to him anymore. What kind of crazy self-control was this? Now it was Crowbell's turn to counter. He started to make his eyes glow, hypersensory. Passive. So we have Crowbell's amazing laser dodging down to the last centimeter. After passing through those thousands of terrifying laser beams, Crowbell turned around and said frankly, "Waiting is your job. When I regain my strength, I will definitely repay today's debt." Crowbell's feet were at their limit, so he decided to go offline. His stamina was almost depleted from all this walking. It would be a while before he could recover. Even if he lost to many NPCs and monsters, he still couldn't lose to players. It was time to rest. Thinking back to his defeat against that person, Crowbell silently swore to himself. Losing to a player like him once was enough. So he shouted the command to exit the game and log out, leaving Luck curious and determined in the mess after the two fought. What kind of footwork was that? It looked very leisurely. Next time I will be stronger. Even if I have to bring more people, I will definitely kill you. After this battle, Luck became even more determined to stop Crowbell from regaining his power. He had faced a huge defeat when he was stopped by a high-ranked player who was on a guard mission in a small town when the Ares Guild attacked it before. After that, he realized that a strong person like him was a threat just by existing. I have to delay his regaining of power at all costs. He decided that for only one reason, all to build a more powerful Ares empire. That night in a cozy house, Crowbell exited the game and muttered, "This is dangerous. I will have to be more careful in the next hunting ground." He opened the door and went out. Crowbell glanced absently and saw his dear mother in the kitchen. He called warmly, "Mom." Crowbell was anxious. The cooking should be left to the maid. Why did he do it himself? His mother smiled gently and said she had told the maid to leave work early. She blushed and smiled happily, saying, "A meal for my beloved son, I want to prepare it myself." Crowbell was deeply moved. Mother, his mind joyfully thought, my heart is not heavy when I return. He sat down at the dining table, happier than ever, filled with gratitude. Thank you, thanks to everyone, I can embrace this warmth again. The members of the luxury goods group have been praying for Mom's recovery, thank you very much. Looking at the kind and healthy mother in front of him, Crowbell thought about the game again. If Ares' power continued to grow like this, it might become a danger in the future. He received bread from his mother, analyzing that Ares' army was much more organized and powerful than other guilds. Adding on the flashback to Ares' guild master, he was even more wary, especially on the battlefield. Ares' passive wide area buff skill was terrifying, and people from that guild like Luck or Scott were also people I had difficulty facing when they were at their peak. Following the memory of the battle just now, Luck's skill was one level lower than Scott's unconditional counterattack, but it was a counterattack with 100% chance that could not be avoided. It would be a hindrance for members using high-end items because their strong attack power would have to be redistributed to the damage. Even so, Crowell still didn't change his mind. However, I have no intention of joining the elite club right now. Grid, I'm sorry. There will be another way to repay you while still maintaining my stance. Please understand. And then remembered that strong man again. Ares. Crowell seemed to have thought of a way to repay him, smiling thoughtfully. I will repay him by blocking it. His looting skills will never target you. The game was done, and Crowell could now focus on reality. Well, the thing was, I was just thinking about what to do now, but there was no need to think too much. He once again showed his gratitude and happiness for the present. Now I have this warmth from my mother. I can recover and start the race again soon. Crowell ate his mother's cooking with emotion. Mom's cooking has brought me so much happiness. But even so, Crowell couldn't lie and praise it. With just one bite, he said with a trembling voice, Mom, just leave the food to the maid to cook, it still tastes the same. Crowell's mother felt the same way, it seemed better like this. Mom followed the recipe, but it was a bit